Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this meeting of the County Council's Strategy, Resources and Performance Committee. The County Council allows filming photography at its public meetings, so please feel free to take pictures and use social media during the meeting. Could I ask, though, that everyone present turns their mobile phones to silent or vibrate while the meeting is taking place? Please also be aware that the meeting is being live streamed and that a recording of the meeting will be available to view on the County Council's website. There is no fire alarm test scheduled for today, so if the alarm sounds, I will adjourn the meeting and we will leave via the side doors to use the fire escape next to the kitchen and make our way to the assembly point in the car park. Agenda item number 1 is apologies for absence. Michelle is not with us today, but I'm very grateful that we have Nick to give us apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chair. There are apologies from Councillor Beckett with Councillor Wyatt here as a sub and from Councillor Goldsack with Councillor Keane here as a sub.
Thank you. I'm grateful to those people for subbing. Next on the item on the agenda are the minutes. We better do disclosable interests. Does any member wish to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest? I see no indications. If at any point during the meeting it becomes clear that somebody does need to raise one, please do so during the meeting. They can be declared at any point. We are being asked, item 2, we're being asked to approve the minutes of the meeting of the committee held on the 11th of December as an accurate record. If any member does not agree, could you raise your hand now? I see no hands, so I will sign the minutes in a moment and we will take that as carried unanimously. We will move on to the action log. An updated action log is also included with the published papers. Most of the actions are complete with 2 ongoing. Item 3 on the agenda is petitions and public questions. We have received no petitions or public questions. Item 4 on the agenda is the Integrated Finance and Monitoring Report, and welcome Stephen to introduce it, the Head of Finance.
Good morning, Chair, and thank you. So this report presents the, as usual, the consolidated management accounts of the Council for period A at this time of 2025-26, which is the end of November. It gives an overview of the Council's current financial position and forecasts for the year, covering revenue budgets, the capital programme and the balance sheet. This forecast is the basis on which the next business planning item is based as well, in terms of any assumptions about the 25-26 position, so bear that in mind. The report today also makes several recommendations to the committee relating to aspects of financial management, which I'll come to in turn. But summarising the revenue budget, the forecast before the committee today is a projected overspend of £5.5 million or 1% for the year. In previous reports to the committee, we've set out the key pressure areas that the Council is facing this year, particularly within children's services, where the national issues around high cost of care placements has driven a large pressure. And the work that's gone on across the Council over the course of the year, that's made significant progress in finding mitigations for those pressures. But separate to those pressures and mitigations, this report shows an improvement from the previous around £10 million forecast overspend. So as set out in the report, that improvement is driven primarily by the recognition of additional funding this year within the waste disposal area called extended producer responsibility payments, which require packaging producers to make payments into a national scheme, which is then distributed to waste disposal authorities to meet the theoretical cost of disposing of that waste. So it's intended to be a disincentive for producing that waste by packaging producers, so not necessarily a reliable income stream over time. So you'll see through recommendation A that we propose at this stage just to reflect that temporarily in the waste disposal budget. And as it is a new unexpected funding source this year, it effectively results in a welcome mitigation to the overall financial position. And despite that, it's worth me underlining that the underlying position for the Council remains challenging this year, and mitigations will continue to be sought over the rest of the financial year. The position on the dedicated schools grant is set out in the report as well, with the projected pressure of £34.6 million this year, which would take the cumulative deficit at the end of the year to around 97 million. That was discussed quite extensively at the last committee, so I won't go into much more detail now, other than to continue to flag that it is a national issue and that the level of risk that it continues to expose the Council to, and that some announcement is expected from government on its plans to try to address that over the long term, is expected to be announced alongside the final local government finance settlement on the 9th of February. So we eagerly await that. Turning to the capital programme, a 3% net underspend on the £155 million programme is forecast for the year. The underspend mainly reflecting an element of slippage in programme delivery linked to things like the weather. Recommendation B, though, deals with a capital grant that the council is looking to receive relating to works to improve or to mitigate water scarcity, and getting that grant then deployed out to other recipients to fund on the ground work to improve water levels in the Cambridge sub-region, the report says. The council is working closely with the national body on this, as set out in some detail in the report, and it should represent a welcome injection of funding for the county. Then finally, Chair, turning to the balance sheet, the report sets out projections, particularly on earmarked reserve levels and on the council's borrowing position, but recommendation C proposes several earmarked reserve transfers in advance of year end, where these are already assumed in directorate forecasts. So they cover a range of drawdowns covering things like draws to linked to things like strategic framework priorities, funding in year emergent pressures from risk reserves, and adjusting funding sources for specific areas. The mitigations, where there are mitigations provided by these transfers, are forecasted, as I say, and have generally been reported narratively throughout the year. But I'll leave the introduction there. Thank you, Chair, and happy to answer any questions as usual.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Okay, open for questions. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Lucy. I wasn't going to go first, but no one else seemed to be willing. I'm a tiny bit puzzled by something. I think I know the answer, but the wording was unusual. And that is for the so-called temporary environment for 25/6 only concerning the extended producer responsibility payments. My understanding of what's being proposed, unless this really is an interim measure and may change before the year end, is that this is not a temporary environment for 25/6, it is a environment for 25/6. It's not as though we're saying temporarily we're doing it, but we may change it for 25/6. And whilst it won't go into 26/7, it is a environment rather than a temporary environment. Would I be correct in saying that?
Yes, that is correct. The terminology is the council's terminology, though, that a temporary environment is one that is not reflected in the next year's base budget, and the opposite to that is a permanent environment that is, unless other changes are made, it's there forever.
Okay, that was what I assumed to be the case. I thought I'd better check just in case it had a different meaning.
Thank you. Ricky.
Thank you, Chair. Can I ask what percentage of the 5.69 million EPR environment goes directly to reduce disposal overspend versus new activity?
I think in this forecast, it's approximately 5.2 million of the 5.6 is assumed in as funding existing waste disposal costs or existing budgeted waste disposal costs.
Thank you. Can I ask what the rest is going on? Is that new activity?
The specific conditions around that funding source are a bit unclear. So I think we're fair to say we're reviewing what the money needs to be spent on, and if it does not need to generate spend on new activity, then I would expect it to play further into the financial position in a later period.
So can I just clarify, if that doesn't go into new activity, am I safe to say that 100% will then go to overspend reduction?
Subject to another decision potentially by committee, depending on the level, that would be the plan, yes, I expect.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, I'm going to just clarify something on my own behalf in that case, which is that effectively what's going on in this budget is that costs in particularly children and young people's are continuing to rise, even though not perhaps as quickly as they were early in the year, but that's been mitigated by some other sources of income. I think if I'm correct about that, while it's a relief that the overspend is reducing slightly from where it was, the core reason for the overspend continues, and that's something that continues to be a serious problem, not only for this council, but for many, many other councils. And I think we all need to take that very seriously when we move forward to the next things on the agenda, which is next year's budget, which is also has a similar kind of picture of huge pressures in particularly children's services. I think that's the overall picture that we're being shown. Matthew, Michael, if you want to disagree with me, come in now. But I think it is important that the committee kind of are aware that those pressures in children's continue to be a major problem for the council. Michael.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. The pressures that are identified in 25-26 have in the main been reflected in the 26-27 pressures and demand. The next paper does pick up one that has been addressed. So item 5 picks up an issue that's been addressed by item 6 in relation to children in care. But as it shows in item 5 report, I think over nearly 60% of our pressures are faced within children and adults, and that's what's caused the significant rise since council considered the budget last February.
Thank you. I think that might need translating for quite a lot of people, but I think it will become clear as we go through the rest of the agenda. Thank you very much, Stephen, for the presentation. I think I'm just checking. I think this is just to note. Oh no, we need to agree the environment. Oh, I was assuming we'd done debate. We've done questions. Does anybody want to debate this? Ricky, thank you. Lorna.
Sorry, Chair. I just have one more question, if possible. Can I ask what the forecast year-end reserve balance will be if we approve the 1.885 million drawdown? That's my last question. Thank you.
The practice, I think, is explained in one part of the report, is that we assume, unless it's a very material recommendation, that the recommendations would be agreed in terms of the projection. So the earmarked reserve balance will be as per the earmarked reserve appendix, which I can scroll down and read out if helpful. So the projected year-end balance on the revenue earmarked reserves is £152 million, but separate out in terms of whether that is the general reserve, ring-fenced, unusable, sinking funds, risk reserves, etc., per the appendix. I think it's a page 58 of your pack, and 59.
Does that answer your question sufficiently, Ricky?
Yes, thank you. On that, can I ask that we split the vote? If I can recommend to split the vote between 1.1, 1.2, sorry, 4.1, 4.2, and 4.3.
I'm expecting to vote on recommendations A, B, and C. I'm happy to split on those rather than.
Yes, that's what I'm asking. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, in which case we will, unless there's any further debate, we will go to the recommendations. So recommendation A, the committee is recommended to agree a temporary environment for 25-26 to allocate the 5.69 million of extended producer responsibility payments grant to the waste service within place and sustainability to fund waste disposal costs, and to allocate 5.69 million of budget to corporate and funding items as per section 3.1 of Annex A. So if we take that recommendation, which I've not read out very well, first, all those in favour, if you could indicate now. Thank you. I think that's unanimous. Recommendation B is to authorise the Executive Director of Finance and Resources, in consultation with the Chair and Vice Chair, to receive grant funding of 1.38 million for schemes that respond to water scarcity, to make resulting budget revisions and sign agreements with central government and Water Resources East to take forward the programme as per sections 4.5. Sorry, that doesn't make any sense. Anyway, Annex A. So for that recommendation, if all of those in favour could indicate. I think that's unanimous. And then recommendation C is to draw down up to 1.885 million from earmarked reserves as per the table at 5.1.3 of Annex A. And again, all those, if all those in favour could indicate. And have you got the number, Nick? Any abstentions? And those against?
That's 14 in favour and 1 against, Chair. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. And thank you, Stephen, for your relentless work on this. Thank you. Okay, we move on to item 5, which is the financial sustainability assessment, and that's Michael.
Thank you, Chair. It's notes in the report, but it's worth me restating that there is a statutory requirement for the Section 151 officer, which is the post that I hold, to inform council ahead of budget of both the robustness of the budget you'll be considering, but also the level of reserves, therefore impacting on the financial sustainability of the council. And this report that's set out before you fulfills that Section 25 duty. Overall, assumptions are that the budget is robust and reserves are adequate. Just going into a little bit more detail, though, I would note that the report at page 92 on paragraphs 3.39 and 3.40 did identify that there was an item of risk in relation to the children in care target saving within the business plan papers as of December of A/R 7.041. And that was deemed a risk following the presentation of the draft budget in December, as a number of factors changed around the demand and placements within that service area. And what councillors will see that in item 6 coming forward, there is a proposal to drop that saving and replace with provisional settlement. And I feel that that's prudent and correct, in my opinion, given my assessment of the savings position, which will always shift throughout the year, but that was a significant one going into the year. The report sets out a number of risks. What I would like to draw councillors' attention, for those that were here last year, is it is pleasing to see that a number of financial risks from 25-26 have reduced. For example, around the waste PFI, this land, the guided busway and the ICB debt. However, it is clear that the dedicated schools, the DSG high needs deficit, remains our highest risk, as it does for most local authorities. At the moment, there is something called a statutory override in place. It is in place, as I understand it, to the 31st of March 2028. It may be revised as a date in the final settlement on the 9th of February, but obviously that is a date in the future, so I can only share that there are rumours that that may change. At that point in time, nationally, there will be £14 billion worth of high needs deficit across the local government sector, of which Cambridgeshire County Council will stand at circa £200 million, which is actually about an average balance compared to some of our peers. And therefore, it is right that I have flagged this on page 88 and put a significant aspect of the report, paragraphs 3.18 to 3.23, because at this moment in time, the government has yet to resolve this matter. We have been waiting now for, I will say, 12 months. It's actually been longer. I would go back to 2014, even, when the new burden should have reflected this. But we are told that we can expect an announcement with the final settlement on the 9th of February. I've therefore set out a number of potential scenarios in relation to whether the legacy and the future liabilities are picked up by central government, whether we'll be required to borrow against them, or whether we will be left with all of the liabilities. And clearly, it's only within the position that government picks up all of the liabilities that there is a risk reduction for this council. So clearly, we await the 9th of February with huge interest, as do my peers up and down the country, before we start to consider the overall impact upon the council. So I do flag that as the key risks. You'll see at section paragraph 2.5 the stages I've gone through in my assessment, which are then set out in section 3. Just a few other things I'd like to note. You'll see that I've also included the CIPFA Financial Resilience. CIPFA is the accounting body for public finance accounting. And they have produced a series of comparators around financial health that are contained within the pack. And you'll see at chart 2 on page 99 that overall Cambridgeshire is around the average, apart from that chart 2 on page 99, which identifies that in terms of borrowing to our income and debt, that Cambridgeshire is in a high position. And that is why over the last few years, the County Council has sought action to reduce its borrowing overall and needs to continue to do that as it progresses. There are 2 types of reserves as set out at paragraph 2.3 on page 77. There's general fund and there's earmark reserves. General are what I might call the rainy day, and earmark reserves are those that are set out for specific purposes. And the report, I've gone through all of the earmark reserves, identifying what the purpose is and the need for those. And we also have a forward look of reserves at table 5 and in chart 1 at pages 95 and 96. This is projecting a 46% reduction in reserves by 2031. Clearly, there is an LGR position to be considered in that period, but it does show a trajectory of using reserves. In relation to the general fund reserves, what I would note is that is a statutory recommendation from myself. I've gone through at Appendix 2 some of the risks that could be identified that, for example, are not funded through earmark reserves, to assess that roughly a 5% need of net spend should be held within the general fund. I am pleased that the last item has identified that the overspend for 25-26 is coming down. I am privileged to have seen the period 9 that isn't reported here, and I know that the overspend is coming down further, so I'm not expecting a draw on general fund reserves. So therefore general fund reserves at this moment in time will remain at the level where they should be. And finally, I would note at page 103, paragraph 382, I have flagged that the council has started to identify funds for local government reorganisation. I do note that there is an amendment proposed for item 6 that, if approved, will slightly reduce that. But there is also, in addition to that, flexible use of capital receipts set aside that will start to also support the cost of transition under local government reorganisation. The recommendation is for committee to scrutinise the paper. So, Chair, I will leave it there and happily take questions.
Thank you very much, Michael. Questions for Michael? Ricky.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to ask, if the government doesn't underwrite the DSG through to 2028, do we have any contingencies? And if we do, what triggers that contingency?
Michael.
So at the moment we have a small reserve for support of the safety valve programme that the council's going through, which is a possibly now I would describe it as a legacy process to deal with the high needs deficit of around £7 million. That clearly is nowhere near the potential 200 million or nearly 100 million as it will be at the end of this financial year. And when we look at the overall levels of reserves that are set out at Appendix 1, you will note that even with the general and the earmark reserves, they will be less than the deficit. So there is no other contingency this council would need to consider, like over 100 other councils up and down the country, the need for a Section 114 if government doesn't deal with that, or would be like the other 100 plus councils seeking exceptional financial support to fund this. That would need to be paid back through borrowing, as I've set out in the report, of circa £5 to £10 million, depending on how much of the legacy and the future liabilities were picked up by the Department for Education. So in short answer, no, there is no contingency other than the £7 million reserve that we've got at the moment.
Thank you. I just have one more question, if possible, Chair. Can I ask what the planned value of capital receipts applied to reduce borrowing is, and MRP in 26, 27 and 28, 29?
I'll come back with a written answer. It is in one of the papers, but I can't come to that quick enough in terms of that specifics.
Sure, thank you. Can I then ask if for a schedule to accompany the business plan at full council, if possible?
Sorry, a schedule of...
The schedule of the planned value of capital receipts that's going to be applied to reduce the borrowing.
We can certainly write to all councillors.
Thank you.
Thank you. Chris, did you want to ask a question?
Thank you, Lucy. I wonder if I may explore an area potentially with a few questions, just to highlight what the actual position is for the council, both now and potentially in the near future. We all know that local government reorganisation may be taking place, and many of us in our minds are assuming that it actually will take place. But with government, there is no guarantee of anything, and I think many of us were quite concerned as far as the timetable was concerned when Alison McGovern, in an answer to a written question earlier this month, stated that the timetable which we'd all assumed, which for us is 31st March or 1st of April 2028 as being the vesting date, that timetable will only be achieved on the most optimistic timelines. Now, that statement itself was contradicted by senior civil servants in a call which I'm sure that County Council was involved with as well, only a week or two later. But even so, there is uncertainty. So my first question, through you, Chair, if I may, to Michael, is that we are producing this budget whilst accepting the likelihood, the possibility of LGR. We're not assuming that it will definitely take place. So that's why we are projecting ourselves out to 2031, because until we see a structural change order which actually goes through Parliament, we don't have a guarantee that we will cease to exist on the 31st of March 28.
Absolutely correct. And obviously strong financial management recommends that we look forward for a 5-year period. And those projections will also help inform any discussions around local government reorganisation as well.
Good. Moving on from that, let us assume that we do see a structural change order come through in, quote, in the summer, unquote, and let's assume that that actually passes its way through Parliament as a statutory instrument, which almost certainly it would, then would I be correct in thinking from your position as a Section 151 officer for Cambridgeshire that when you, well, from that point, but then when you come back here in a year's time, that your concern will only be for the financial position of Cambridgeshire County Council up to the 31st of March 2028, assuming that's the date that we see, and that your assessments, your considerations and your projections will not go beyond that date?
Clearly, the shadow authority and then the vesting authority will take responsibility in terms of what it does with those reserves. So yes, in short, I will do that, but I will also look at a projection beyond just to help inform future thinking, but the decision making won't at that point sit with the County Council beyond the 1st of April 2028, as you say.
Well, at that point, of course, Chair, the shadow authority won't have been even elected at that point. And my interest is your legal position. And if you need to come back in writing on this, then so be it. But my question is, from a legal point of view, will your considerations as a Section 151 officer only run to the 31st of March 2028?
Clearly, if we take something like the major infrastructure reserve, which is there for the guided busway and will be a reserve that will be spent over the next 8-9 years, I will be projecting forward based on an assumption around the use of the earmarked reserves. So I will still project forward to enable the assessment of those reserves to then be informed. Clearly, the other factor that we don't know is whether there'd be any change in that time period during that. So it'd be imprudent of me not to have a view to look forward.
Okay, I'll explore that just a little bit more in the next question, which is that it is very good news that many of our finance risks are reducing. They're not eliminated by any means, but they are reducing. And it is in the nature of local government that new finance risks will appear as well. That just goes with the territory. But the one funding risk, the one finance risk, which is existential so far as this council is concerned, and many others, but not all of them by any means, given that quite a number of councils have a zero liability in this area, is to do with the dedicated schools grant and the potential liability which exists on that. And as you said, we are told that the reset is guaranteed up until the 31st of March 28, although again, government could change that. My concern here is that if that reset does not take place, if we do not have a solution which is produced by central government, then the risk involved in that just becomes greater and greater as time becomes shorter and shorter. Now, if there is no extension beyond 31st March 28, if government doesn't come up with a solution, then my concern is what your attitude as a Section 151 officer would be so far as Cambridgeshire County Council is concerned. If you are aware that the structural change order has gone through, if you are aware that the County Council will cease to exist on the 31st of March 28, will you, in your assessment of the position of the council, and particularly thinking about the potential of a Section 114 notice, which is just, I think this issue is just about the only issue which at the moment is on the horizon, which could even theoretically generate a Section 114 notice, would your attitude be, well, that's a problem for the 1st of April 2028, which is beyond the county council, and therefore there is no need to consider, for example, a Section 114 notice if time gets closer and closer to that liability potentially crystallising?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Bowden, for that clarity. As I mentioned, we are expecting government to make an announcement around this whole position on the 9th of February 2026. So I will not be waiting till February 2027 to pass any comments. I could be passing comments on the 9th of February in just a few days. But clearly, at this moment in time, it's conjecture, and we await to see what government will do. And as a result of that, what action is needed as a result for the council, whether that is a capitalisation directive through exceptional financial support or other measures. One thing I will say is government does understand the issue. I am awaiting with interest their solution.
I think that that's a very diplomatic answer that we've had from our Section 151 officer, Chair. And of course, we wait with interest for the 9th of February. But then let's be quite honest, we've been waiting with interest for announcements to have been made for a number of years, and they haven't been made. If a resolution is announced on the 9th of February, which is comprehensive, then of course we'll all be interested to see what the implication of all of that is. I'm not holding my breath on the assumption that that is going to happen. So it seems to me that we still have that risk, that existential risk, hanging over us, either in our current form or potentially in the form of successive unitary authorities. My question again is, that potential risk for the unitary authorities is not a matter for our Section 1. Oh, is it not? Is it or is it not a matter for our Section 151 officer to give consideration to if on the 9th of February, as I anticipate, we do not get a final answer to this? Now, I could be wrong on this because government changes its mind almost as often as it changes its members of cabinet when things go wrong. But I was shocked when it comes to local government reform. I was absolutely shocked that government magically found £500 million for Surrey as part of the LGR process, and Surrey, of course, is the lead, the first authority in the first tranche going through for LGR. So I now don't know what to expect, what could or could not happen. I can see the massive financial hit that would have to be taken in the national finances if the DSG were actually fully sorted. But I remain concerned because time is against us on LGR. I know it seems a long way away, that it's more than 2 years before vesting day, but assuming that it goes according to plan. But that 2 years is going to go remarkably quickly. And if the DSG uncertainty continues to hang over us, then all of the planning for new unitary authorities will be overwhelmed by the potential consideration of going almost immediately into Section 114 notices. So that's why I'm asking, and I accept it's conjecture based on what may not happen on the 9th of February. That's why I'm asking about the Section 151 officer's opinion about how his reporting to us will be affected by what may be after the vesting date.
So I am told from MHCLG senior officials that we will have an answer on the 9th. What that answer is, I don't yet know. And as I say, the conjecture being therefore that either they will pick up all or part of the legacy and a future arrangement. So in November, the Chancellor said that from the 1st of April 2028, DFE would pick up the future liabilities. That was then corrected by further correspondence, which said that there would be a review to make sure that all reasonable efforts had been made to reduce and manage the legacy as well as the future, which leads me to believe that there will be a part offsetting by central government. As the level of high need deficit at the 31st of March 2026 is projected at £6 billion, rising to £14 billion in 28. That is a significant sum to find down the back of a sofa. And my working assumption is therefore that could be a capitalization directive similar to the exceptional financial support. However, the question then becomes, what level of that is it? And I put some conjecture in the paper, I think at paragraph 3.23, 3.19, around, well, what if that was 5% or what if that was 10%? Because when we look at the safety valve program, which was a precursor to what seems to be coming, that is what central government looked at us picking up at around about circa 5%. So there then becomes a question of what the level of affordability is. So at that point in time, I will be advising council how we would treat that in the period that remained. So if the statutory override, which I don't think has yet been laid in Parliament, saying the 31st of March 2028, was actually the 31st of March 2027, then I would be advising this council that it needs to take action as a result of that. If the statutory override went to the 31st of March 2028, as is currently stated, then depending on the outcome of that, I would be recommending that the council would need to fund that 2-year period and I would be advising through the local government reorganisation process that the however many numbers of unitaries are formed will need to consider this in their thought of the budget and how they will afford it. So I would be passing my advice in terms of my understanding of where the Cambridgeshire County Council, just as Peterborough City Council would be doing onto those unitaries in terms of our projections. It certainly depends, therefore, on what the statement is of the 9th as to what my advice will be.
Thank you. I'm very grateful, Chair, for your indulgence, but it is a really important issue in terms of the finances of this council and the potential financial viability of this council. And I'm very grateful, let me put it on record, to the Section 151 officer for the level of speculation he's been willing to undertake and share with us. It's entirely appropriate he does speculate about what may be the case. I'm very grateful that he's shared as much of the speculation as he has with us, because forewarned is, of course, forearmed. And whilst I fully accept that the Section 151 officer will be forewarned, it's good that he forearms us as well, and I'm very grateful for that. We don't know what will come out, as the Section 151 officer says, on the 9th of February. I'm pleased to hear that it looks as though something definitive will be stated. We will see what that is. But if that does have an effect upon Cambridgeshire County Council, for example, that date of 31st March 28 that we've all been talking about turns out to be 31st March 27, and for that matter, if later in the year we find out that the vesting date is not going to be 31st March 28, but is going to be delayed, then that fundamentally has an effect upon the County Council. And my question, primarily about any potential bringing forward of that 31st March 28 date, is if it has a significant effect, whatever this announcement is, has a significant effect on the finances of the council for 27/8 or for 26/7 or for 27/8, will there need to be some fundamental change to the budget which is brought forward to this council at its next full council meeting?
So if I could just draw councillors' attention to page 89, paragraph 3.24. It's the very bottom of the paragraph, just above 325. I do actually state that if my assumption is incorrect following and at this point when I wrote it, I didn't know it was exactly the day before our council. And in 323, I note that, first of all, I would discuss this with the head of paid service and monitoring officer. But in 324, I do actually note that if it was a significant issue, I would need to report back to full council on the consideration, having met with the head of paid service and monitoring officer. So yes, it could be that significant, and literally they couldn't have picked a worse date. Well, they could have done. They could have picked the 10th, but yes, I will certainly be emailing all councillors as and when the final settlement is known.
Thank you. And I did pick that up, but that's not quite the point I was trying to get. My apologies, Lucy. And let's hope that this conversation is entirely theoretical and doesn't materialise, but it could do. And if it does, given the 1-day gap that there is between the announcement and our scheduled full council meeting, although bearing in mind we do have a secondary date in the calendar as well for full council. If it is that significant, would it be possible that we do not have a vote, we do not have something able to be put forward to us on the 10th of February, and it may be necessary for that to be deferred for a number of days? Up to I think it's the 13th, isn't it? To give enough time for a budget to be brought forward, which is consistent with the information which we will then have in hand.
I mean, it is something that I'm glad it's not just me that's worrying about it. It is something that's causing me concern. I have been talking with other 151s, giving advice about adjournments as opposed to closing the meeting. All I can say at this stage is conjecture. We need to see what happens on the 9th before making any of those calls. But yes, the fact that I've drawn it to council's attention at paragraph 3.24 does set that I consider this to be a significant issue and one that government needs to rise to in resolving.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your indulgence, Chair. It's much appreciated. It's a great shame we're dependent upon government for this.
Thank you. I'm just going to ask a couple of questions, follow-up questions from the perspective of somebody who is slightly less bleak on all of this. On the assumption that we are not currently kind of expected on the 9th to immediately take up responsibility, I mean, almost even if we are, we have covered the costs of continuing this borrowing at the level at which it currently is in the current budget, is my understanding. I mean, the revenue cost of the borrowing, not the how do we repay the lump sum. I mean, if the government suddenly say you need to repay all this money by X date, we will not be the only council who will suddenly be in Section 114 territory, and they know that. And they must also be aware that many, many councils are setting their budget at the beginning of February. I think I would be a little bit surprised if the government choose to effectively make 20 councils bankrupt the day before they set their budgets, which would effectively be what they were doing. If my analysis on that is correct, Michael, I think that the risk that we're not able to set our budget, while it exists, is not all that high. Would you say that my assessment was reasonably correct?
Clearly, the risk of two accountants having conversations, as Councillor Bowden and I were, stimulates bleakness, which is in our nature. As I say, I think there's so much conjecture about the statutory override being brought forward to the 31st of March 2027. So clearly, 26-27 as a budget setting year would be sufficient. But what I wouldn't be able to tell council is actually if there was a borrowing requirement or need to set money aside in 26-27 or 27-28. So we haven't covered borrowing if that were the need to borrow for DSG. We have covered borrowing for the capital programme that is set out within the next item, but we haven't considered any borrowing for the DSG deficit, because at the moment we are assuming that we won't have to. Clearly, that would, one would hope, fall into the new unit. Well, one would hope. One would, yeah. One would hope that's not an issue to deal with in 26-7. Let me rephrase it that way. But it will therefore be one that the Section 114 notice doesn't cover the upcoming years, it covers the medium term. And I think that's where I am hopeful, because government do understand that this is a significant issue. I think we're over 115 councils now, and I think the largest deficit at the end of this financial year is in excess of £600 million. So as I say, at £100 million, which is what Cambridgeshire is projecting at the end of this financial year, we are not in the realms of some of our peers. So absolutely, this would cause chaos to the system at the point in time when it is also considering local government reorganisation for large swathes of it. So I know that government have heard the message. I am therefore hopeful that government has taken this extra time, because we were expecting at the provisional settlement to come forward with a solution. So I remain hopeful, despite my bleakness if it doesn't.
Thank you. I think it was important to have that sense of that actually things might be all right on the 10th following that conversation. Ricky.
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to note the S25 assessment, but as someone who's not an accountant, I just want to clarify. I mean, from the Section 151 officer's comments, I believe I didn't hear there wasn't an actual contingency, but then from our chair's comments, there is, I've heard there is some sort of contingency. So we have part contingency. But what I'd like to see is the dependency on the national DSG fix front and center. So if possible, I'd like to see a properly worked contingency, if possible, because I mean there is a risk there that if we don't get the backing from government, we are going to be in serious trouble. So I believe we do need a contingency. So a part contingency is all well and good, but we need to look at worst case scenarios for as far as I'm concerned as a possibility.
I think if you took from my comments that there's a part contingency for funding the whole of the DSG thing, then that was not what I had intended to say, because I don't think we do have a contingency like that, and I don't think we can realistically. I also don't think that it would be wise or good use of our finance team's time to spend a lot of time working that up between now and the 9th of February, because I think it would probably be more sensible to wait and see what happens on the 9th of February. And when we've seen that, then we will know what scale of crisis we are in. I think it's pretty clear that there is a crisis. I mean, there's a crisis that is it's effectively a shared crisis across between central government, upper tier councils, and the schools and the education system. And where the fixing of that crisis sits between those people is what we might find out on the 9th of February. How much we will find out on the 9th of February remains to be seen. But I think, I mean, it is pretty clear that without some sort of clarity about it, the difficulty for councils in trying to set budgets and decide what level of risk they have to manage is extreme, and it's getting worse every month, effectively. One of the other kind of elements of this is that we have been expecting reform to the SEND system for well over 9 months, and it keeps being delayed. And every month that it's delayed, more and more parents, for understandable reasons, put in for EHCPs, which costs us a lot of money, because they are worried that that system's going to change, and if they miss the boat, they will not get them. And that's a pattern that there is across the whole of all councils, and we are in that position too. So I think rather than asking our officers to go away and draw up contingencies on the basis of deeply unknown things, when actually we will get a certain level of clarity on the 9th of February, I think at this point the thing to do is to wait for the 9th of February and then draw up our contingency plans. So I hope that seems like a reasonable answer, Ricky.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So at that point, is that where we make sure that we're not baking in any unfunded DSG risk into the general fund?
I think probably, I mean, and I will come back to Michael on this in a second. I think what we need to be aware of is that we will be setting a budget on the 10th of February, which will already to some extent be a little bit out of date because we will have had new information on the 9th. That actually is, I mean, it's a significantly more extreme version of that than we usually have, with the dates being quite so close together. But it is not that unusual that we set budgets at this council, understanding that the finances are going to change in the coming months. And this is a particularly extreme example of that. And we will then have to deal with how we manage that in kind of over the course of the coming year. If I've got that wrong, Michael, you will doubtless tell me.
No, I think the critical thing to note is when we come on to the next item and we're looking at the medium-term financial plan, in all possibility, there will be a requirement for further borrowing in latter years to fund this, as I expect that government will move some of this responsibility to local authorities. How much that is, because I don't know what reasonable or unreasonable spend is, we must also record on record that our schools in Cambridgeshire are among the lowest funded in the country, and therefore our schools have less funding to deal with this matter itself. So how does that get played into a factor of reasonableness, means that it's impossible today to predict what element of the 100 or 200 million we could have to fund. Government have trailed enough that suggests we will be left with an element of that. Whether that's 1% or 99%, I genuinely cannot say. Whether we will get that clarity on the 9th, because we will also have advisors who will work with us. And we know from advisors who came in for safety valve, just as those that were called, it was called Delivering Better Value, DBV, in other councils, those inspectors or advisors came in and found that local authorities were doing everything that they could do. So it does suggest that we will have a further round of advisors coming in to calculate what our sum will be. And if they calculate that's 10% or 20%, then that would have to be borrowed. There is no contingency. And depending on the statutory override and depending on when the borrowing needed to be taken out, that would fall either within this council's purview or the new Unitaries Council's purview. And that's something that I think will start to become clear on the 9th. But I don't think it's going to have an impact on the 26-7 budget. And if we did have any spare money, we would be setting it aside. Unfortunately, we don't have any spare money to set aside, subject to any councillors' amendments.
Chris.
Sorry to come back, Lucy, but you made a comment which I thought was worth amplifying and then just digging a little deeper on. You said, and you're entirely correct, in fact, I'm expanding slightly on what you said, that every single year that we have a budget, for that matter, it applies to all councils, almost before the budget is presented to council, it's already out of date because further information is coming all the time. We know that, it always happens, and we allow for it. But you used a particular word to describe what we're potentially facing here, and that is an unusually extreme position, where an announcement which is made very shortly before the budget could significantly affect certainly 27.8 and possibly even 26.7. Would you advise all members of the council very carefully to ensure that that date of the 13th of February is kept open so that they could attend a meeting on that day at full council if it is called? Would you give that advice to us, please?
I'm happy to advise that, but I'm very, very much hoping we won't need to use it. I think it's always wise to keep it free if you possibly can, but I will hope that the announcement on the 9th of February is not so extreme that we are not able to set a budget. Thank you. Any further questions? Elisa?
No, I am sorry. I genuinely wasn't. I've been a little bit surprised that we spent so long sort of talking about things we don't know what's going to happen. And so I said, I'm not going to add to that, but now I kind of have to. My experience, and this is kind of, I presume all governments of all the colors that I've seen, what they don't tend to like is come up with like a massive, big sort of, here's what you owe us tomorrow, do it, because they know that's chaos. Like even the tiny examples, like when the RSG ran out and we found ourselves in receipt of a negative grant and we owed government 10 million. I mean, that never happened. They never asked for that 10 million. They sort of said, we'll just be happy with zero kind of thing. And then what councils like, and I use extremely big quotation marks for that, it's not that they like, but what they prefer is to know that pressures are coming and that they are pressures that they can spread out over the medium term. So not you owe us 100 million now, but you owe us $1 million a year for the next whatever, because if you owe us $1 million a year for the next whatever, starting 2028, that's something most council would possibly be able to cope with. I'm assuming that this is the reasonable expectation. So I wouldn't want anybody to go out and start saying, on the 10th of February, we are going to, be told that we owe 100 million by the next week, because that would not happen. And I really hope I'll be proven right. I also question the idea that, if something happens on the 9th and we might, even if it happens, and I don't expect it will, that we might think this is sufficiently problematic for the budget that we have to sort of adjourn. in that extreme case, you would not be able to come back together on the 13th and have all the papers. I mean, it's at that point you have to wait significantly longer than that. So I would suggest let's just do our budget as we are planning to, and it will be Michael's and Tom's happy duty to start spreading out those liabilities in the medium term, as they know how to do full well. And you can judge me on the 9th of February to see just how accurate I was.
Thank you, Elisa. I suspect you are right, and I sincerely hope so. And I think we'll probably leave that one there. Okay. Your financial sustainability assessment seems to have been largely a discussion about DSG, which is not unreasonable under the circumstances, Michael. I think we have scrutinised the Section 151 officer's assessment and noted the conclusions in consideration of the proposed budget. So all we needed to do was scrutinise. A certain amount of scrutiny has definitely taken place. And if everyone's happy, we will move on to item 6, which I think, who's starting? Are you starting on this? Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. So next item on the agenda today is the draft business plan and budget 2026-27 to 28-29. Chair, you'll be delighted to hear I'm going to say very little by way of introduction because I suspect you want to explore the more detailed points, particularly pertaining to the budget. I think it's important to note that this report is for Strategy, Resources and Performance Committee to consider and then recommend for full council. Clearly, we've already touched on some of these points regarding the Section 25 report that you've just considered, but in introducing this, I was going to say the report also contains the refreshed strategic framework for the authority, so it's not merely the medium-term financial strategy, treasury management and capital programme. This is, of course, the Council's business plan and budget as a combined report. The three things I was actually going to highlight, you spent some time discussing already. So number one, I was going to highlight the fact that quite rightly we only have a provisional settlement for local government at the moment, and obviously we await the detail of the finalised settlement on the 9th of February, and I think the Section 25 report you've already received highlights that as an issue. Secondly, I was going to highlight the proposals contained in this draft report around funding for local government reorganisation and the costs of transition, noting that those costs are expected to be fully absorbed by Cambridgeshire and Peterborough local authorities, and depending on which of the options government chooses to take forward following statutory consultation, the costs of transition could be quite substantial. If you look at some of the options proposed, that could be in the order of 34 million or upwards. Some others have higher upfront transition costs. I'm highlighting that, Chair, because I'm recognising that we will be expected as a county council to fund a substantial proportion of those transitional costs alongside the district councils and the unitary authority in Peterborough. So I think it's important to highlight that as an issue, not just in setting the budget for the coming year, but obviously in consideration for future years. And then finally, I think I said this point in December when you received the updated position, but important to highlight that, of course, Cambridgeshire has been an underfunded council in terms of national government grant funding for a considerable period of time. And once again, despite giving us a longer term financial settlement, government quite rightly has tucked away the statement that core spending power of local authorities only will rise over the next 3 years if local authorities use the maximum flexibility granted to them to increase council tax, which in the case of this authority as an upper tier authority would be, as is set out in the report, 4.99%, including the 2% adult social care precept. So I do just want to be clear that whilst statements are being made that local government funding is going up, that is on the proviso that local government applies council tax increases to the maximum level possible over that 3-year period. Those are my introductory remarks, Chair. The Section 151 officer is shaking his head at me, so I don't think he has anything further to add at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you. Very restrained. Okay. So this is a really important document that we will also discuss on the 10th of February at length. So I think there's a kind of balance to be had between what we discuss at this meeting and then what we discuss at that one. There have been some changes since this last came to the Strategy and Resources meeting in December, and it's been to all of our committees in between. And I would like to thank all of those committees for the work that they have done in scrutinising it. I think there is a change that is going to be put forward. I'm not quite sure whether it's probably the right time to put forward your amendment quite soon, Edna. But let's have a discussion. We'll see if anyone wants to ask any questions on it, and then we'll come to the amendment. I think there may also be another request that should have come in from Highways and hasn't. So I'll come to Robin on that one at some point. But first of all, are there any questions for Stephen or Michael on the papers that are in front of us? Nope. Okay, great. Edna, do you want to move your amendment?
Thank you very much. Yes, following discussion at the Children and Young People's Committee, as part of our scrutiny of the budget, it was clear that there was concern about the transitional arrangements or lack thereof between the end of the Household Support Fund and the beginning of the Crisis Resilience Fund operation. And so this amendment is to introduce a little bit more funding to address this transition, because we're very concerned, although the Household Support Fund is ending on the 31st of March, and that is clear. The Crisis Resilience Fund, it is a successor to the Household Support Fund, but only in the sense really of it coming after. It's quite different, and there is going to therefore be some discontinuity, and we're very concerned that there are people who are going to, as it were, fall off a cliff edge, people who are families who are really reliant on that food voucher funding for the holidays. So what we're proposing is an amendment to the revenue budget to add £1 million identified from the local government reorganisation reserve to the Crisis and Resilience Transition Reserve in order to facilitate a £2.7 million transition fund to support those families.
Thank you very much, Edna. Do you have a seconder? Thank you, Alison. Do you want to speak now, Alison, or do you want to?
I'll reserve in case anyone has anything they wish.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Are there any comments on the Chris?
Thank you, Lucy. I wasn't planning to comment on this. I understand what's being done. I have a few concerns about it, to be quite honest, but they weren't so material until the chief executive spoke a few minutes ago. And the chief executive said something which quite shocked me and does relate to this particular amendment. And that was, and the chief executive may well be will be far more realistic in his assessment than I am, I have to say, much more experience. A figure was given of potentially 23 million, if I understood correctly, for the LGR costs for, I assumed, for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, if not more. Now, that number is massively more than I would have guessed, and it would have been a guess on my part. I don't pretend anything else. And it just concerns me, since this does refer to local government reorganisation and the reserve that we've got, are we anyway massively understating what we've got in the local government reserve? And I do remember in the report there is some mention that that figure might increase, but is that reserve already significantly under resourced? And will this, what's effectively a timing change, to be quite honest, will that actually exacerbate what is already an inadequate position as far as our local government reserve is concerned? Now, also reading this amendment, I got the impression that what is being suggested is that the local government reserve would be made up by effectively capital receipts. And my assumption on that is that capital receipts would be able to be utilised because there is a capital element to local government reorganisation. Now, my apologies for raising this now. I wasn't planning to. It didn't seem necessary until the chief executive gave that number, which I certainly heard, and it certainly gave me some degree of alarm. So I'd be really grateful, potentially the chief executive, but someone were to be able to answer that question. Thank you.
Chair, thank you to Councillor Bowden for the question. Just to clarify, the figure I quoted is the total cost of transition, so that wouldn't be incurred as a one-off payment and wouldn't be an upfront requirement, so that would be phased over a couple of years, not simply the coming financial year. The cost of transition would be borne by all 7 authorities in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, so until we're clear on what the cost-sharing implications are and who will pick up what proportion of those transition costs, which will vary depending on which option government chooses, it's difficult for us to actually forecast how much this authority should put specifically into an LGR reserve. What we have been saying, and indeed I've certainly said to the chief executives of the other 6 authorities, they need to take consideration of what money they can put in now as well in readiness for the costs of local government reorganisation. They will obviously do that in consultation with their leaders and elected members. But I think it's just us trying to put money in the right way now to prepare for some of those initial costs. It's very difficult to estimate the exact cost. The figure I quoted, however, was a PwC figure that had been used as part of the modelling process for some of that work. So I think, Councillor Bowden, it's right to ask the question, but I still think the proposal that's set out in the budget, and importantly, I should say, the statutory officers all reviewed and considered the proposed amendment. We still think there is reasonable provision being made now, but recognise those costs could rapidly increase, and that's something we would have to bring back to members in due course. The final point I would make, which is really important, given the state not just of this authority, but I would suggest a number of others in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, flexible use of capital receipts is clearly going to be required to cover the costs of LGR for this area, as it will in many others that are having to undertake this requirement from government. So I wouldn't say that places us into a unique position, but I would just finish by saying all 3 statutory officers looked at the proposed amendment. All 3 of us have signed off on it. Thank you.
Thank you. Elisa.
I mean, thank you. I have a couple of comments, but because they're comments, I'll make them in the main debate. In terms of this particular amendment, I just wanted to ask, now mindful of the fact that, as we all know, there's been an announcement that from September, the eligibility for free school meals is going to be widened. And I know our finance team and the very good people at the Children's Directorate have already worked out exactly how many children that means. I don't know that, but I will memorize the figure at some point. The question is, if we pass this amendment today, what happens to the scheme after September?
Pick this up, Edna. I mean, I probably can, but I expect you can answer it better than I can.
Yeah, I'm what we're proposing is a transition. So we're assuming that there will be things in the Crisis Resilience Fund that will support the most vulnerable children.
I think there's also an expectation that this will help with the transition up until September, and that what happens after September will need to be different from what we've been doing in the past. I will also say that we're having to do this because the Labour government have reduced the amount of money that they're giving to support this work. And that's deeply disappointing. Any further discussion on the amendment? Okay, in which case maybe we'll 2. I didn't see whose hand went up first, so I'm going to take Elliot and then Ricky.
Apologies, I was waiting until the question-specific phase was over. I just wanted to thank Councillor Murphy for bringing forward this amendment. I think it shows a lot of foresight, and I'm happy to support it because I think it really is important to bridge that gap and make sure there is continuity here. Thanks.
Thank you. Ricky.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I just want to ask a question because I don't quite understand. So this is this to bridge the gap? So it's like a temporary measure, or is this something that we're going to have to fund ongoing? I just want to clarify that. I'm quite unsure.
Today we're proposing a temporary. It's to bridge a gap so that people don't fall off a cliff and have no provision. But we are still working out the details of what the Crisis Resilience Fund program will look like.
Thank you. That clarifies that. So we can look at this later on down the line once we have an idea of what we're looking at.
Thank you. Ros.
It's slightly tangential, but it's a question I keep on asking in my head. So if the free school eligibility is expanding in September, does that mean the full pupil premium payments remaining the same? So the schools will be receiving a large amount of pupil premium payments. So will the local authorities and the other schools be receiving more funding, or is something else going on? And if it's something else going on, if it's too complicated, I'm happy for that to be circulated in a different way.
I think I might suggest that we come back to you with a written response on that. Partly because it's not necessarily directly related to our own budget, and also partly because I think it may not be completely clear. So I think if it's all right, we'll come back to you with a written response.
That's fine, and I only said it because it would be really helpful to be able to tell your communities about what's happening to funding for schools. But if it's complicated, that's absolutely fine.
Absolutely. We will ask for a briefing on the impact of the expansion of free school meals and pupil premium, if that's okay. And I've got a thumbs up from Martin at the other end, so that's very helpful. Thank you. Is there any more discussion on the amendment? And then we can come on to questions and discussion. I think we've done questions on the full paper, but we can come on to discussion on the full paper as amended. I haven't actually heard anyone speak against it, although I've heard Chris have some reservations. But regardless, we will go to a vote. All those in favour of the amendment as proposed by Councillor Murphy, if you could indicate now, please. Thank you. And all those against? And any abstentions? Thank you. Thank you very much, Councillor Murphy, for bringing that. That's very helpful. I think I'm just going to raise one other point, which is that I think there has been I'm not going to ask, I'm just going to say that there may be a change by the time it comes to the full council. I think there's been a slight miscommunication between the Highways Committee and the finance team over something not that is not for this year's budget, but for the following year. So it's possible that there will be an amendment coming at full council on that one, whether it's an amendment or a change. Well, we can't change the papers now, so it will need to be an amendment. Chris.
Sorry, Lucy, would you just elucidate there when you said it's not for this year, but it's for next? Do you mean it's not for 26/7, but it's for 27/8? So it's not for next year, but it's for the year after.
Completely. With the change that I think that the Highways Committee thought that they had asked for, which has not been reported as something that is in these papers, but it's for the 27/28 financial year, and that may come forward as an amendment at full council rather than here. Okay, thank you. Is there any further discussion or debate on the budget papers? It feels as if, sorry. Do you want to speak, Robin, or are you happy that we've left it there?
I was going to say, do you want, because there's a tangential reference to it in the appendix paper. It's just not set out the way that we expected it to be. So I don't know if you want me to explain that here, or no? Oh,
I think it's fine. You can if you like.
It was simply that we discussed the benefit of the 20 million a year extra capital funding that the Highways team have been getting, which allows us to do adequate forward planning. I've since had clarification that that is not assumed past 2027, and if it's not assumed past 2027, that affects the kinds of investments and plans that we can do. And so we would need to have assurance that that would be included in the forward business plan so that we can, for continuity purposes.
Thank you for the clarity. We will pick that up and work out what needs to happen between now and full council. Thank you. Are people happy now? I'm just sorry. I'm slightly surprised we're not going to have a longer debate on it, but these papers have been discussed through all the committees and will be discussed at some considerable length on the 10th. So if we don't have any more discussion now, that is also fine. I'm just checking whether we need to vote on it. And what the format, the words is, sorry. I can't actually see that here. What are you expecting, Nick? Are we submitting it to full council? Yes. Yeah, we will vote on that. So if the committee are happy to submit these papers to full council, if you could indicate now, that would be very helpful. Okay. Have you got those numbers, Nick? Thank you. And all those against? And any abstentions?
That's 8 in favour, 6 against and 1 abstention, Chair.
Thank you very much. So they will be submitted to full council. Thank you. Item 7 is the local government reorganisation statutory consultation. Joe, this one is you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so the report in front of committee today sets out an update regarding the most recent development in the government plans for local government reorganisation, which kicked off almost a year ago when the council received a statutory invitation to participate in LGR from the then Minister responsible, Jim McMahon. I won't take committee through the details of the process that we've been through over the course of the last year, as I think we're all well appraised, but just to remind us all that following submission of 4 options for LGR in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough by the 28th of November deadline, which are set out at 2.4 and 2.5 in the report, on the 17th of December, the Minister of State for Local Government and Homelessness wrote to the leaders of all 7 councils in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough to acknowledge the work that had been undertaken on the options submitted and also to set out the intended next steps. The letter advised that the government expects to host the statutory consultation required of it by the Local Government and Public Involvement in Health Act 2007 over a period of 7 weeks, and that 7-week statutory consultation period will begin at the start of February 2026. However, the letter did not provide a specific date, and at this stage that has yet to be confirmed by government. Although not detailed in the letter, but as has been touched on already in the debate on previous items today, following the closure of the statutory consultation after that 7-week period, the intended high-level timeline for LGR in the remaining 2-tier areas that aren't covered by the Surrey reorganisation or by the devolution priority programme areas, which includes Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, which has been set out previously by government officials, includes a ministerial decision on the option for implementation in the summer of 2006, with a vesting day of those new councils on the 1st of April 2028. As a statutory consultee, Cambridgeshire County Council will be invited by government to submit a consultation response on all options for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough the government chooses to consult on. And this report recommends that committee notes receipt of the ministerial letter on the 17th of December, the contents therein, and delegate authority to respond to the government's statutory consultation to the Chief Executive in consultation with the Chair and Vice Chair of Strategy, Resources and Performance Committee. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Joe. Very succinctly but accurately presented. That's very kind. Okay, comments on let's please not have a long debate on the details of local government reorganisation. Are there any comments on the proposals here? Ross.
Thank you very much, Lucy, and thank you for the report. Just a question first before I make some more substantial comments. But on the delegations, under the current constitution, who is the response delegated to? Is it this committee or is it council?
This is, sorry. We delegate it to the Chief Executive, which is standard for this committee. I mean,
so currently, who holds the power to respond to it? Because we're being asked to delegate it to the Chief Executive with yourself and Lorna's input. Who currently holds the delegation? Is it this committee or is it the council as a whole?
Sorry, this committee. Otherwise, this committee wouldn't be entitled to delegate it.
I was just checking because I know that the scheme of delegations and statutory responsibilities are very different when it comes to a committee system compared to a cabinet system. Hence, I wanted to double check.
Do you want me to? I think Stephen would like to.
Chair, probably just for the benefit of Councillor Martin, just to confirm that is absolutely the view of the monitoring officer that the decision vests with this committee. Therefore, the delegation is appropriately being proposed through this committee. She signed off on the report and was actually the co-author alongside the Assistant Chief Executive. Thank you.
That's really useful. Thank you very much. Based on that, I completely recognise that we've got to make this, and I won't be touching on the substantive issue of LGR because we could be talking for hours about that. But what I do think it would be right for the response going to government to come through this committee first rather than being a delegation We had a full and long debate at full council on this. There were very opposing opinions on both sides of the chamber, including on the administration's side, who brought forward an amendment to the paper that was brought in front of us saying that they weren't comfortable with the position, but we're going to put it forward anyway because we need to put something forward. So I think it'd be right for it to come to this committee. I could appreciate if we had a very short time frame for the statutory consultation for it to be delegated, but we don't. We have 7 weeks from the date that we find out when the consultation comes out. A notice can go round for an extra meeting of SRMP if there isn't already one in the calendar. So I'll be asked. So for the vote on option B, I'll be voting against that and trying to keep it here at SRMP to come through here, and it be decided by every member of this committee.
Okay, thank you. Chris.
I'd like to amplify the comments just made by Councillor Martin. There was considerable concern, both within the council and outside the council, that council made a decision as to a recommendation before the business case was actually able to be put before members of council. Now, given there has been significant movement since then, it would be quite appropriate, I think, now that we have a business case which would be able to be given in much greater detail, for that to be done in public before this committee, so that a decision can be made as to what an appropriate response would be to this consultation. We have additional information available to us as a council as a whole, which we didn't have when the decision was made by full council to put forward the option which was put forward. So I would agree with Councillor Martin, and I'll ask you to consider agreeing as well that it would be appropriate, given the importance of this, it's appropriate for it to be done in public and not in private.
Thank you. Having seen some of the forms that these are, I'm not sure that I agree. I think it's a relatively bureaucratic and not terribly. We've kind of done the debate on it. I'm not sure I agree with you. Elliot.
I also just wanted to express agreement with that. I think this is a matter of big public interest that is obviously going to shape the direction of our region. So I think it would be particularly helpful for it to get that extra level of scrutiny.
Thank you. I think we do have a working group that that have been following the LGR process. I'm quite happy to suggest that the consultation response comes back to that working group. Having seen some of the responses that we've already sent in to areas, neighbouring areas around here, kind of the consultation responses on what's going on in some of the areas which are further ahead in this process, I don't think that this is something that it would feel worth bringing the Strategy and Resources Committee in specially to discuss. So I'm quite happy that the response comes back to the working group. I don't think it needs a full public debate in this meeting. I don't think that would be helpful. Stephen, do you have anything else you want to add? Okay. So we've got a clear difference of view. I'm perfectly willing to take a vote on the basis of that difference of view. Ricky.
Thank you, Chair. I'm in agreement. I will third that. I think the residents deserve member oversight, but also oversight for themselves as well, especially on something this big. So I would just like to third that. And that's my point of view. I don't think we should have blank delegations. I think bringing the drafts responses back to this committee is something we should be doing, because this is something very big that is of very much a public interest.
Okay, thank you. There's just a difference of view about what the level of this type of consultation response is about. Okay, I think I don't think we necessarily. I mean, Chris, you can come in again, but I'm happy to.
I'm really grateful for your indulgence yet again, Chair, and I'm only coming in because of the comments which you've made. It used to be the case that the Liberal Democrats were the party which advocated open government, and this is a really important issue, and I'm assuming that our response to the consultation is going to be important in itself. So I can't see how it's going to be possible for, unless you are no longer the party of of open government, I don't see how it's possible for you to say it should all be decided privately, quietly behind closed doors. I think on an important issue, we need open government. And I just can't square the comments that you've been making with that commitment that the Liberal Democrats used to have. Have I missed when the Liberal Democrats stopped believing in open government?
You have not, Chris, but you will also know perfectly well that this council responds to government consultations on things all the time. We do not bring every response back to a committee meeting. If we did, we would be here doing committee meetings kind of every day of the week. There's a level at which it is appropriate for committees to discuss things, and there is a level at which there is not. There is a difference of opinion about the importance of this of the public need to be involved in this council's response to a government process. This is a government process. Our option, the paper putting forward the option A, which was put forward by this council and sent into government, is in the public domain. We had a full council meeting on it. This is a consultation response, which is a bureaucratic process, and I don't think it needs to come back to this committee. I fully understand why you think it should. I just disagree. So on that basis, I'm going to take this to a vote, please. All of those in favour of the recommendations, if you could indicate now. Thank you. All those against? Thank you. And abstentions? Thank you.
That's 8 in favour, 6 against, and 1 abstention, Chair.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is the corporate performance report, which is also Joe.
Thank you, Chair. So this is one of the quarterly performance reports to SRMP with its agreed performance monitoring scorecard covering the period Q2 for 25-26. The scorecard attached to Appendix 1 includes the strategic key performance indicators reported across each of the Council's policy and service committees, with Appendix 2 including the SKPIs that form the basis of the scorecard for the metrics, which are the responsibility of this committee specifically. Taken in the round, and particularly when considered alongside other reports such as the IFMR or the risk register, the performance report is designed to provide members with a holistic view of organisational health and delivery. As set out at 2.6, SKPIs are rated according to a RAG regime, whereby red indicates performance that is 10% or more off target, amber indicates performance is off target by less than 10%, and green indicates performance is on target or exceeding target. Where currently possible, SKPIs are benchmarked against national and regional comparators to help with an understanding of relative performance. In summary terms, as at the end of Q2, across the 87 SKPIs reported in the scorecard, 27% were red, 17% were amber, and 40% were green. 27% are categorised as contextual metrics and do not have a RAG rating applied. And as set out at 3.7, the period-to-period change in the direction of travel across these metrics shows 48% improving, 27% declining, and 12% unchanged or within range. Of the 10 SKPIs that form the basis of the SRP committee scorecard, 89% of those are reporting green, and 11% or 1 is a baseline measure. As set out at 3.5, one metric in the scorecard relating to FTE, that's full-time equivalent sickness absence, has been suspended from this quarter's report and to a data quality issue that has been identified in the ERP Gold system. It is expected that those issues will be resolved by the time of the next reporting period for Q3. Committee is recommended to scrutinise the scorecard and comment on the performance. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Joe. Any questions for Joe to start with? I don't see any questions.
Chair, a comment.
Yep, absolutely, Stephen.
Chair, a brief comment. As Joe's rightly said to committee, there is an issue around the ERP Gold system in terms of being able to provide update on things like workforce absence rates. As some members may be aware, the ERP Gold system is not uniquely used by Cambridgeshire. It's part of a shared arrangement with another authority, and indeed the ownership for the system is actually held by another authority. As you might expect, once we became aware of that issue, we escalated that to the authority that hosts the system to get the necessary fix made so that reporting could be reinstated. We continue to press hard for that reporting fix to be made, and I have to say compliments to Cambridgeshire officers. They were the ones that spotted the error in the data reporting in the first place and highlighted it. So actually our officers are the ones that have highlighted the issue, and this will clearly be applicable to more than just this authority. So we're trying to get that rectified at speed. But I just thought it was important to note we were the ones scrutinising the data and identified the problem. Prior to that, it hadn't been picked up by the people that actually host and run the system for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Edna.
Yes, I was wondering when Q3 data will be available, because Q2 is quite old now.
I think Q3 is due for reporting at the next SRNP committee, which is it 12th of March? Is that the date?
Thank you. It's a very reasonable question. Joe. Well, sorry, Ros.
So I've got a number of questions. They're not all for Joe, I think, but do I just ask away? Right. Okay. So I'll just blast through all the questions. So in terms of public health, I recognise the scale of the, I recognise all these things are challenging, whatever. How do we get above red and amber in quite a few of the categories? What do we need to have those sort of population-wide changes? In terms of the EHCP thing, because it says that whilst we're hitting the KPI at 0 and the focus on the commentary is about that 0 rate, what we're not actually seeing is the work we're doing. Just because you're not hitting the time target doesn't mean there's not a lot of improvement, a lot of work going behind the scenes. So I wonder if whilst that is 0, some commentary around what is actually happening beyond just approaching the KPI would be helpful and would be possible to see in future reports or as an appendix. I noticed the homeschooling numbers seem to have gone up a lot. I know a lot of parents do an excellent job and are committed to homeschooling, but I am also aware of cases where children are very isolated, and it can become isolated when they are homeschooled. And I wonder how the council is, and I also recognise that the council is very limited in what it can do, because I've had cases in my division, but how we are monitoring that and making sure that children are properly protected. 2 more questions. Employee engagement. I think we all feel it in this council with the sort of, the prospect of local government reorganisation around the corner. And I'm sure employees and members feel it the same. There are some things which you're always looking forward as like in your life, you look forward, what do we want to do? But when you're told, the whole thing is going to be stopped at 2028, it puts a very different perspective on how you operate. And I wonder how that's being managed, and also whether it's worth the experiences of, so as members, we're the decision makers, and, we're not here saying, brilliant, we want LGR. And does that communication between employees and members, is anything to be added to that we all share these kind of concerns, and it's affecting all of the way we respond to local government? And finally, a question about website accessibility. It seems to have scored very well on website accessibility, but I find when you search for stuff, it doesn't come up. So if you search a dragon pacture, because dragon pactures are all the rage, and you want to circulate a helpful article to the people you represent, nothing is coming up apart from the most recent comms item. So what is that website accessibility metric looked at, and is there anything that can be done to improve the search function? That's it.
I think that, Joe, you will not be able to answer all of those questions. There are a number of people in the room who will be able to answer some of them. And given that we have Martin here, I think some of those will come to Martin on. I think there may have been one or two that Stephen will come to, but maybe we'll see what Martin's got to say first. Martin, just while you're settling yourself, one of the specific ones that really drew my attention was the direction of travel for children, the number of children who are obese when leaving at the end of year 6, which I think is, the amount that this council can do about that metric is limited, but it is really serious that it's continuing to get worse. So anyway, I'm not expecting you to be able to fix that, but maybe you can answer the broad thing about how we report these and what we are doing as a county.
So firstly, on the last point first, I'll say that is something I will take away and have a conversation with public health colleagues to make sure where we are linking up, we are doing that effectively. I recognise that data as well, so we can pick that up together.
Thank you. I think the other points were on EHCPs and home to school. What we're doing to support parents who are doing homeschooling and the rise in those numbers.
Yeah, absolutely. So, so you're absolutely right. There is a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes. It isn't just that all children are not getting their education healthcare needs assessment in time. Whilst we're on that, the work that's been done within the service to improve that performance isn't reflected in this report, but will be reflected in the next quarter. So the provisional data is that in October we had 10% of children achieving that, so away from the 0%, which is great. In November it was 27%, and in December it was 30%. So that's only reflects the children that have had their assessments completed in time. What we know is, and what Children and Young People's Committee reflects, is that there is a lot of other children that don't come into that category, and what are we doing around that? So yeah, we can certainly make sure that in future we can add to the commentary which explains a little bit more detail about that. Children and Young People's Committee also gets a quarterly detailed report on send improvements, and which makes sure that there is oversight and scrutiny on those improvements, not just on that 20% metric. For homeschooling, yeah, we have a strong homeschool offer for children that are taught at home, but you're absolutely right to point out that we don't have the ability to intervene in those households, and it's completely voluntary with those households whether they accept that offer of support from us. There is a proposal in the Education and Wellbeing Bill that we have a proper registration process for children that are home educated, which I would fully support, because I think it means that we could then offer all of the right support to all of the children that are home educated across Cambridgeshire and have a proper response about why they would or would not want to accept that. But we do know that the majority of children that are homeschooled have a really good experience of homeschooling. There's a small minority that need a bit of extra support and with safeguarding risks, but that doesn't reflect the majority. But registration would help us to make sure that we access all of those children.
Martin, while you're there and we're talking about homeschooling, and I'm sorry, this is not anyway, this is tangential. My understanding is that in that bill that's going through, there is quite a lot of expectation that councils will have to pick up quite a lot of work about monitoring what is being done in homeschooling, which is a whole new area of work for us. Are you and your colleagues being mindful of that? I mean, my expectation around whether there will be funding, new burdens funding, there clearly ought to be new burdens funding that goes alongside that, but my expectations are not high. Is that something that we're looking at as something that we are likely to have to do once that legislation is passed?
It's certainly something that we're hypothesizing about, yes, about how we would meet that, assuming that we don't get any additional new burdens funding to meet that need, and also making an assumption that it would be that the expectation would be really based around the curriculum, and what children are getting at home reflects the curriculum that they would be getting at school. So we're working on what that would look like, but we don't know for sure. But yes, it's definitely in our thinking.
That's reassuring. And presumably we're also talking to other councils about it, because it is going to be an enormous new burden, whether we get paid for it or not. Thank you. Sorry, there were lots of other questions. Stephen, I'm going to come to you for some of the others.
Thank you, Chair. I think I'll pick up a couple. Before I do, can I just mention the point made, Chair, about childhood obesity? Just to say the public health team working with other partners have recently taken a revised obesity strategy, I think through the Health and Wellbeing Board for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. So there is work already in place in that regard. I believe that is due to be discussed by chief executives collectively within the course of the next couple of weeks. But that new obesity strategy is intentionally focused on addressing some of the issues you've already highlighted. We will come back, however, outside the meeting and provide a bit more of a written update for members on that point. Turning then to Councillor Hathorn, and two of the other questions, I don't think I'll necessarily have them all, but hopefully I can provide answers where possible. Start with the website accessibility one. That's a metric that's actually set by government. It's not a locally determined one, so it's about government's assessment of our website accessibility against the national digital accessibility standards they apply to public sector websites. So the score is effectively against the government's benchmark. On the point about search functionality, I will say that we can have a look again. It's something that the web team do look at continually, but I absolutely agree with you. The point I will make, and I'll use the opportunity to say this to officers rather than to members, of course, search functionality is basically a process. Relies on proper and accurate content on the website, and that is not entirely in the gift of the communications team. That falls on services to make sure they're provided with the relevant information so the content is equally accurate to enable the search function to work well. However, we will take away the comment raised about search functionality, so I'll pick that up through Joe, given that communications sits with him. On employee engagement, just to note that, first of all, the Council undertook a full workforce survey in the latter stages of 2025. That was 2 years on from the previous workforce survey around employee engagement. We will be due to share the results of that in the coming weeks and months. That will go to Staffing and Service Appeals Committee, but will also be shared more broadly with members and, of course, with members of the Council's workforce. Turning then to the issue of morale, motivation, engagement and LGR. I think, first of all, I welcome the comments you make around members' views of LGR, and I think it would be fair for me to say they are definitely echoed by the vast majority of our workforce. It is one of the key issues that comes up from individual members of staff on an ongoing basis, and that includes that it's that continued uncertainty and not knowing what the future looks like. And whilst we are putting a lot of support in place, we are doing a huge amount around internal communication, including a forthcoming series of roadshows at different physical locations with County Council workforce involving members of the corporate leadership team. We're also having to be really honest with staff and say where we don't know the answers, we don't know, and we will get them as soon as we can. Some of that's obviously in the hands of government rather than us, but I absolutely agree. It's really important we continue to communicate and share what we can with people and reassure them as much as we can. We do on the Council's intranet have a series of frequently asked questions and keep information updated around LGR. That includes really important statements like, for the vast majority of people, there won't be any impact on their jobs. In reality, on day one of new councils going live, the majority of people will transfer to the new authorities, however many there are, and effectively on day one, what is likely to change for most of them is a different ID badge, different organisational name, and probably a different email address, assuming all of those things happen. Beyond that, they should be doing, broadly speaking, the same job in the same location, at least until those new councils decide how to move forward with their future operating models and structures. So we are constantly reassuring staff, but I have to say to you, it is the single biggest issue that keeps coming up time and again from individuals and teams. The executive directors hear it on a daily basis. I hear it on a daily basis. And without going into further detail, I will also say there is quite a groundswell of opinion from a large proportion of our workforce around where they would prefer to be, depending on the option government chooses post LGR, but that's clearly their personal opinion. Thank you.
Chris.
Thank you, Lucy. I thought your tangential question was really, really helpful and interesting, so I hope you'll indulge me in having a slightly tangential question as well. Councillor Hathorn raised the issue of the search function, and I do appreciate that the accessibility calculation is a national one done. In fact, I've looked at it in the past. It's done on highly technical grounds, many of which I didn't even understand fully. But nevertheless, Councillor Hathorn did raise the question about the Dragon Patcher and wanting to get information about it, which doesn't seem to be an unreasonable thing to expect to be able to do from a search function of the County Council's website. Similarly, I have tried unsuccessfully, and this may just show my technical failure, to use the search function to find freedom of information request answers which have been given by the council to members of the public, and I cannot manage to do that at all. May I ask either that I be told how to do it, or that somehow that function, when we use the search function, that function is provided so that freedom of information requests, as is the case with all councils which believe in open government, that freedom of information requests are easily accessible on our website.
I'm sure that's something that we can take away and look at and compare what we have with what other places do. So I'm perfectly happy to take that away.
That wasn't quite what I asked. I asked if we could do it rather than compare it with other authorities. I hope you would agree that again, back to open government, that publicising freedom of information requests is part of the scrutiny process which exists and the ability of local residents, let alone councillors, to know what is going on. So I wouldn't have thought we want to keep it secret. And I would just hope that I could have a written response on the subject of access to freedom of information requests, because I think that it is an important issue.
I'm sure you can have that written. Yes, you can definitely have that written response. Thank you. Ricky.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to come back to the scoring in regards to the KPIs. And I think I've asked this question before, but forgive me, I've misplaced my notes on the response. So it's going to be a very similar question, I think, to what I've previously asked. Is there any reason why we can't get sort of dated paths to green on those that are not currently green? And if not, why?
I think it might depend quite a lot on what the metric is. I think some of them, it might be possible to do dated paths to green, but other ones would be almost impossible. I mean, the one we were talking about to do with obesity of children at year 6, I don't think we could do a dated path to green on that. I don't know whether, Joe, you're willing to take it away and have a look at whether there are some of those metrics that we could do that for.
I think it's an important question with regards to how the commentary is provided, and certainly we would strive to make sure that we are being specific in the responses that we're giving in that commentary. So, as the chair said, it will depend metric to metric, but as a standard, I think that is something that we should be striving for. And as you will appreciate, this has been a bit of a development, been a bit of a journey around the scorecard, but that is something that we will take away and keep pushing for.
Thank you. Yeah, just on that, I appreciate there's obviously metrics that are going to be difficult, if not impossible to do, but those that are possible, and I would assume all members would agree, having a dated path to green would be very helpful, and it would also enable us as members to see the progression and hold that progression to account.
I think that's definitely something it would be useful to take away, because for some of them that would be really helpful. I would also just like to say that the performance information that we get presented now is astonishingly much better than it was 4 or 5 years ago. So a huge thank you to the team for all the work that's gone into that. It's it enables us to see what's going on in the council much better than it did in the past. Thank you. I don't see any other questions, and this is not something we have to vote on. It's just for noting. So I think we can say that for scrutinising and noting, and we have scrutinised and noted it. So on that basis, I think we will continue. Thank you very much, Joe, for presenting it. I think that's your first time presenting this. Is that correct? So thank you very much for that. And item 9 is the committee agenda plan and training plan and appointments to outside bodies. Nick, do you have anything to add on that one?
Thank you, Chair. No, there's nothing to add.
Wonderful. At which point, I think that's the end of the meeting. Thank you all very much. I will see some of you back here again for a further meeting of strategy and resources at 2 o'clock. But for everyone else, thank you very much. And I suspect the next time I see you will be the 10th of February. Thank you.